Welcome everybody to the Impact 4 series. We have Michelle with us today to discuss about all the interview tips and techniques that we can follow to have a successful interview. And I am Jyotsna Bitra. I go by the name JB. And Michelle today happily agreed to join us and is an amazing person and very friendly person. I know her from the last Dreamforce, and from then on, I rely on her for advice, and we are so fortunate to have her today. Without further ado, let's get started. And Michelle, take it over.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so thrilled that I am not doing this in the Western time zone or the Pacific time zone because, boy, I gotta tell you, that's way too early for me. So I am thrilled that you guys all got out of bed to come to this presentation this morning. So we're going to talk about how to prepare for an interview. So a little bit about me. As JB said, we met last Dreamforce. Super sad that we're not there again this year. I've been in the Salesforce role at my company for probably about 6 years. I started out as a user, and then about 1.5 years or 2 years in, they sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, our admin needs some help. So you want to sort of become a part-time admin? And I'm like, okay, why not? It's amazing how things like that happen. The accidental admin hashtag definitely comes up with some really interesting stories of how people got there. However, I'm also a user group leader. I work with the Trailblazer Mentorship Program. Have met some wonderful people through that. I'm a one-time Trailhead Ranger because apparently I decided that certifications were more fun than badges. But I'm closing in on double Ranger, so I got to get there by the end of the year. Love to present. So thrilled to be here. It's hard to get me to shut up, so just kind of beware. Otherwise, just thrilled to be here to talk about this with you guys today. So kind of a quick overview for our agenda. We're going to talk about how to take your experience and apply it to the job description, whatever that may be. We're going to talk about how you can answer some of the questions you may expect to get. And we'll focus on some of the hard ones, the ones that make you uncomfortable or the ones that make you go, oh. And then finally, interviews are a two-way street. So you need to be asking questions of your prospective employers as well. And so we'll talk about some of the things that you want to make sure that you have on your list for that as well. So I definitely want this to be an interactive session. There is audience participation. If I must bribe you with stickers, I will. You've been warned. But for now, we will jump right in. Okay, so you sent in a cover letter, maybe you definitely submitted a resume, filled out a job application, and somebody said, hey, we'd like to talk to you. And you're like, yes! Oh, crap, now what? The first thing that you want to do to start preparing for your job interview is look through your resume about what on there probably jumped out to them that got you the interview. Because you want to be able to speak to that in terms of how it applies to their job description. More importantly, think about the experience that didn't make it onto your resume. And honestly, your resume is not supposed to be a detailed list of your entire life and every job you've ever had. The current standard for tech resumes is 1 page, unless you have like a PhD. So it's hard to fit a lot on one side of one sheet of paper. That's where you have to get pretty, I guess, creative, I'll call it, with what you put on and what you don't. Some of the advice I give to my mentors includes, if you've done the same thing at multiple jobs, put that on one job and then highlight other skills at the other job that maybe weren't a part of the same job that you had somewhere else. It really is supposed to get you the interview. That's the purpose of your resume, is to get your foot in the door to get an interview. So once it's done its job, now we need to expand upon that. A lot of times, you know, keywords are helpful. If you can mimic the language and keywords of the job description in your resume, that's going to get you through some of those resume scanning software tools. And also, someone that's familiar with the job description and is looking at your resume and starts to see those same words, all of a sudden it starts to build that familiarity and that positive connection with you. So that's always helpful. So I'm kind of a big fan of never sending in the same resume twice unless I mean, if you're taking the shotgun approach, I mean, it probably works as well for resumes as it does for dating. So good luck to you. You know, hope volume is your friend. But for most cases, I would recommend that you, at least to a certain degree, tailor the resume to the job you're applying for. So what if you're changing careers? There are several people, I know, Brian, you mentioned that you've got lots of supply chain experience. I've had mentees that came from retail sales, one who was a daycare director, and you may be sitting here asking yourself, well, how on earth am I going to take my experience and insert completely not techie career here to a Salesforce career? And it's all about figuring out what those soft skills that you have really are, and how you can draw that picture for your interviewer. Because this is one of those situations where you can't assume that they're going to make those same connections. You're basically going to have to spell it out for them. So for a daycare director, for example, you are going to have experience with budgets. So being able to be fiscally responsible, keeping a project on track, that goes along with some of those soft skills around project management. If you're a daycare director, that means you have your staff that you're working with. I'm going to guarantee at some point in your career, you've had some conversations with parents. There's a lot of regulation and inspection that goes on in, you know, those industries. So you've probably had to deal with government agencies. And more than likely, you've stepped into a classroom and you've had to work with, you know, toddlers or young children. So what that tells me is you're able to communicate effectively with a wide range of people. And that is one of those soft skills that it's hard to teach someone. So being able to take something like that and translate, you know, working with governmental agencies and parents to working with, you know, the C-suite executives at this company, you know, and having managed toddlers, pretty sure you're going to be able to handle your users at that point. So while I would not ever in an interview equate my users to toddlers, it's still something like that you can detail the types of people that you've worked with and how to communicate with, and how you feel that that translates into a career with Salesforce. Retail sales. You know, Salesforce has this little thing in its name called sales. So if you've been a salesperson, you probably understand quite a bit about a salesperson's job, what they do, the challenges that they can face. And that gives you a background that's going to help you be more effective in building a system to support your sales users. Now, granted, there's plenty of other people that use Salesforce, and you can still have those people using some of those same tools, so it still translates, because you're able to understand and gain empathy from that perspective that will help you be better at gathering requirements. But if you have some of that in ground in your back pocket, they don't have to teach you about the sales process as much. You know some of the basics, so that gives you a leg up above and beyond someone else. What if you're an accountant? Accountants are wonderful people. I have no idea how they do their jobs. I've never liked numbers. Math is not my friend. But generally, they're very detail-oriented. They usually have a lot on their plate, and those are things where being able to put together a list of detailed requirements, being able to focus on a project, all of those skills that go into making you a successful accountant can go into making you a successful Salesforce professional. And again, a lot of the time, even if you're looking for what they call an admin job, admin is kind of like other duties as assigned, because more than likely you're going to be gathering requirements and asking your users, you know, what is it that you need me to build? How can we make this work better for you? And that's kind of more of a business analysis job description than a traditional admin, but I would argue that that line is very, very blurry. You're also going to have some training. So if you've been a teacher or an instructor or done anything along the lines of public speaking or building content for anything, you're going to have a leg up when it comes to developing documentation, putting together presentations, being able to actually talk to your users, train them on the new things that you've built in the system. And so it's important to know that not everything translates to a concrete Salesforce technical skill. but they translate to all of kind of the soft skills that are going to go along with those technical skills to make you a solid Salesforce admin / analyst. All right, we have Jade here who is volunteering with Supermoms, and so this is an organization that's pretty much dedicated to people who are re-entering the workforce. And people are like, well, I've been a stay-at-home mom for so long, gosh, I have no idea what to talk about in an interview. If you've got more than one kid, you know how to juggle. So being able to be organized, to be able to multitask or at least manage multiple projects at the same time and keep everything moving forward, being able to work well under pressure, all of these are things that can come out of that experience of managing a family. It's not something I think you need to be afraid of. I'm not one for ever shying away from those types of things. It's a perfectly valid choice, especially these days. If you wanted to take some time off to focus on your family or to focus on your education or to focus on whatever, especially now with COVID, there's a lot of people who lost jobs through no fault of their own that are trying to re-enter the workforce. I think the biggest thing is if you don't act ashamed of it, be very matter of fact. I made these choices. This is what's right for me now. I'm looking to get back in the workforce. I'm excited for this opportunity. This is how I'm planning to leverage the skills that I took from that time away for the benefit of this position. And that confidence, even if you don't feel it, fake it till you make it, that's fine. Just knowing that you had valid reasons to do it and that you're confident that this is the right next step and that you are a good candidate for this job really is all I feel like you need to be able to present in an interview with that. Okay, so how to answer questions. I hearken this back a lot to how I teach my mentees to prep for a certification exam. When you're reading the question on a cert exam, you need to be asking yourself, what skill are they actually trying to uncover, or what topic does this exam question cover? If they're asking about record access, are we talking about something like a profile or a role or a sharing rule? If it's about, what I'm able to do, are we talking about cred? And when you start looking between the lines and kind of inspecting the content or the intent, I suppose, of the question, it helps you get the right answer on a cert exam. That same thing can help you in an interview. There's a lot of questions, and I've got some examples that we'll go through, but there's a lot of questions that on the surface, you're kind of, why are you asking me that? Or is this a trick question? And all of a sudden, when you think it's a trick question, you're like, oh God, I don't know how to answer this one. And so you start to freak out a little bit. We don't need to do that. Ask some clarifying questions. If you're not sure what exactly they're asking, don't be afraid to turn this into a conversation and say, okay, this is what I'm getting from the question that you've just asked me. Can you clarify if this is the type of answer you're looking for? Or what did you mean by a term that maybe you're not familiar with if it's in an industry that's new to you? Depending on the question, if they ask you a scenario question, possibly, ask for a minute to think. And, I'm not saying sit there for 5 minutes and plot out the perfect answer in your head, but don't be afraid of a few seconds of silence. If you need to take 10 or 15 seconds to gather your thoughts, do so. And by communicating that in advance, it takes away that discomfort that humans have with silence. So, gosh, I didn't really, prepare for that, or that's a really interesting question. Can I take just a couple of seconds to organize my thoughts before I answer? Assuming that they don't say no, which if they say no, that's going to be a red flag. But, take 10, 15 seconds. It feels longer than it is, I promise. But be able to organize your thoughts a little bit so that when you start talking, you're not fumbling around and umming and ahhing and feel like a complete moron that just, opened your mouth and spewed out nonsense. And finally, you can't prepare for everything. You might get the question of, if you were a unicorn, what color would your mane be and why? Who's your favorite Care Bear? These are things that it's going to be out of left field. So being able to stay calm and recognize that you cannot prepare for every question in an interview, and using some of these other techniques helps buy you time, helps you organize your thoughts. It gives you the ability to stay calm and not panic at a question that you're being asked. So I've pretty much broken it down into what I feel like are the three main topics that we're going to get questions on in an interview. So first one, technical questions. If there are places in Salesforce that you can kind of see from the job description, maybe where they focus, and you feel weak in some of those areas, brush up on them. So we recently, and by recently, gosh, it's been 1.5 years ago now, so maybe not recently, we hired a junior admin at my company. And so we helped put together the questions list for the interviewer, my boss. And some of the things that I started out with, knowing that we were looking for entry-level, brand new, or even not certified Salesforce admins, I asked them, I said, explain the difference to me between a profile, a role, a sharing rule, and a permission set, and when you would use each one of these. You'd be amazed how many people got this wrong. You'd probably be more amazed at the people who said, well, gosh, I don't know, but I could research it and get back to you. Looking for kind of that base level, I expect someone to be able to basically tell me that a profile is something that's required in Salesforce, and it sets basically what a user is able to do in the system. A role determines essentially what they can see. A sharing rule is how you share something, and if you can't, get that out of the question itself, I'm probably going to question your ability to think on your feet a little bit. And a permission set, while this is not even a complete answer, it's just like that's how you grant permissions to users. I mean, so even having just basic knowledge, I'm not expecting them to be able to tell me that there's permission sets and permission set groups, and now you can mute permissions with a permission set, which is new. And, I don't want you to be able to explain the role hierarchy to me, but just being able to answer some of those basic level questions that more or less prove that you've got the knowledge of Salesforce as a platform. One of the biggest questions, several of my colleagues and I talked about this, and we said, we want to know, what do you do when you don't know something in Salesforce? Salesforce is so big and so broad. Nobody, not even a CTA that's passed their giant board exam and is one of the 200 CTAs in the world, knows everything about Salesforce. It's not possible. They put out 3 releases a year and they throw more stuff at you. And unless your full-time job is to learn everything about Salesforce and you never sleep and you're a robot, you're not getting there. So I want to know what you're going to do. A lot of this helps me understand, are you a self-starter? If you don't know, are you just going to give up? Are you hungry to continue learning things, or are you content to come in, punch a clock, do your job, and go home? Am I going to have to babysit you? Because if you don't know an answer, you're going to start coming to ask me every 5 minutes until I spoon feed you. These are the kinds of things I want to know about a candidate, and that's why I'm going to ask this question. Honestly, one of my mentees this last round told me, I'm really nervous about interviewing because I just feel like I don't know enough. And I said, mentee, open up your web browser. I want you to go to Google. I said, tell me when you're there. And they went, all right, I'm there. I said, great. You never are allowed to tell me that you don't know enough again in your life. Because 90% of knowing how to Salesforce admin or even code, and David Liu will tell you this in some of his videos, is knowing how to Google things. So it's about knowing where to find the answers. Now I'll press on this one. All right, so the first thing you tell me is you go to the Trailblazer community, or you go to Google, or you go to wherever. I say, okay, what if that's not enough? Where else do you go? And basically the expectation is that if the first one isn't enough, I want to know they'll go at least 2 places or try 2 things before they'll come to me. If they'll go, well, gosh, after I've Googled it, or if I can't find something on the Trailblazer community or Trailhead, I'll ask somebody on my team. That answer tells me, okay, you're self-starting enough that you're going to go and try and find the answer yourself, but you also realize there's a point where you're spinning your wheels. And so you're going to take that and go, it's more efficient for me to ask someone else for help. So it's, again, a balance. Do you have any experience with whatever? Do you have any experience with CPQ? Have you ever used Field Service Lightning? We use Conga contracts. We use Adobe Sign or DocuSign. Have you ever used those things? The dreaded answer to that question of being no. You're going to run into that, and it's fine. If it's in the job description, I will encourage you to do at least your minimum level research to say, no, I haven't, but I've done a little research about it, and I know the basic premise of insert topic here. I'm really excited to have a chance to stretch myself and grow in this position by learning about that topic. It really interests me for the following reason, and then put in a not lie here. Because you're committing to this if you get the job. And if you lie and you absolutely hate it, and they're like, but you said you were so excited about this, then essentially you get to go to your boss and go, yeah, well, I lied to get the job, and that doesn't sit well. Okay, more technical questions. What do you feel is the most important consideration when developing new functionality in Salesforce? Now we're trying to get to how you gather requirements. Again, this is sort of that BA thing, but I put this under technical because it's about how do you actually build? How do you get the requirements to know what to build? Some things like this, I think it needs to be based on your experience. And if you don't have that experience, this can be a tougher question. Some of the ways I would answer this is making sure that we build what they need instead of what they ask for. And that goes along with the third question as well. So we'll get down to that. But a lot of times people will tell you, start developing with the end in mind. If you're being asked to track something in Salesforce, you need to know what they want to track. How do they want to report on it? What needs to come back out? Because how you get it out determines how you put it in, which determines how you build it. And so that's really where I'm looking for someone who looks at the process as a whole and can take a step back and understand that it's more than just being given a set of requirements and, you know, typing away at my new custom fields and my new custom objects and making all the pretty shiny in Salesforce. If you build it in a way where everything has a multi-select pick list and is a text field and I can't report on anything, what good did that do me? It really did. The preferred approach to maintaining good data quality or hygiene. This is something every admin is going to fight every day of their job. So having an understanding of what you can do in Salesforce to help with this, understanding that part of it is just communication and user training is also important, but knowing that good data quality and hygiene is things like making things that are reportable pick lists and restricting those to the pick list values and putting things together in a way that, you know, you can put validation rules in place to prevent your users from leaving important fields empty, or you can make them required, which is, you know, a double-edged sword. But there's different ways to go about this to guide your users through putting the correct information in. And then finally, again, you've been asked to add a new custom object in Salesforce. Where do you start? Okay, just because they ask for a custom object really doesn't mean they need a custom object, and it's up to you to basically know better than your users. If you let them, toddlers will put everything in their mouths. So we as adults have more experience. We need to stop them from putting things in their mouths. The same thing with Salesforce. Just because they think they want a custom object to track all of this information, they may not know everything that you have built. So digging into what they're actually trying to get to and giving them solutions that work is more important. And I know we're probably going to run a little long, so I hope you're okay, but this is a story that I tell all my mentees, and I feel like it's really important to drive this point home because this is one of the biggest challenges I've seen as a Salesforce admin. I was in a project management class, and they told us a story about how one day engineers of the US government came to their bosses and said they had a problem. The Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. was disintegrating. So they went, okay, this is a problem we need to solve. And the solution was they changed the setting of the lights. Now, can anybody tell me why, if the Washington Monument, which is made out of rock, stone, is disintegrating, your answer is to change the light schedule? Does anybody have an idea?
Was it because it was attracting bugs at night?
You just took the 5-step lead. Congratulations. That earns all sorts of kudos, and quite frankly, with an address, it earns stickers. Yes, that's exactly what was happening. So what they found out was the Washington Monument was disintegrating because the cleaners that they were using on it were harsh and abrasive and was causing the stone to disintegrate. The reason they were using harsh chemicals to clean the Washington Monument was because it was covered in bird poop. The birds were pooping all over the Washington Monument because they were attracted to the bugs that were flying around. And the bugs were flying around because the light schedule was set such that the bugs were still out and being attracted to the Washington Monument because of the lights. But if you would have come to most people and said the Washington Monument is disintegrating, they probably would have told you that we need to come up with some different kind of cleaner, or we need to restore it, or we're going to have to put some sort of protective coating over it, or maybe we need to start making plans to rebuild this amazing monument. And really all they needed to do was adjust the light schedule. So it's basically you had to ask why 5 times to get back to the real root of the problem, to understand the solution that you can deliver that solves the issue. It's treating the underlying condition as opposed to addressing the symptom that is presented to you. So personally, I think it'd be a fun story if you have time to tell it in an interview, but yeah, hopefully that's something that you always remember, that the Washington Monument disintegrating means you should change the light schedule. Okay, scenario questions. They may ask you basically what an exam question is. You know, if they have a problem that they're trying to address, you know, they want to know that you can come in and start solving problems. So for example, 2 departments are using Salesforce, one's outside sales, the other is account management. One focuses on prospects, one focuses on existing customers. Obviously, accounts are the backbone of Salesforce. They both use it, but they can't figure out where to find the information that they need, and they're all complaining about it. So how do you fix this problem? Again, start looking at some of the keywords in here. I've got 2 different teams. We're talking about visibility. They need to see different things on the same record. I'm looking at page layouts and record types. If you give me either one of those answers, I'm going to count it as you figured out a way to address the problem. And it's basically an assumption, if you have record types, you need different page layouts. So that's why I'll accept either answer to that one. But it's about being able to dig into the question. And again, these are one of those, you know, can I have, you know, a couple of seconds to organize my thoughts and think this through? Clarifying questions. If you want to know, you know, what kind of fields are they using, or, you know, how is it set up today? Those are things that you can ask that also show that you are willing to dig in and look for additional information, because users rarely think to tell you everything you need to know just because they don't know you need to know it. Okay. In Salesforce, sales managers fill out and submit a proposal request, which is a custom object, to our sales operations team, which basically gives them the products that they need to put into a quote. Now, there can be lots of changes to this. And so once you send it over to the sales ops team and they start working on it, they don't want more changes coming because it's hard for them to keep track of what's changed. So they want us to lock down that object. So how would you do that? Lots of different ways. You could use a validation rule, and basically if it's in a certain status of submitted, is changed with a validation rule, stops you from making a change to the record. You could have automation to update the record type when it's submitted to be a read-only record type where all of the fields on the page layout are marked as read-only and you can't touch anything. So it's about thinking through what functionality could support this, and whatever your answer is, be willing to explain how you came up with it. Basically defend your design decision. Whichever way you go, there's multiple ways to do it. And so it's not necessarily this is the perfect right answer. It may be one that they're looking for. You know, I had an idea of how I wanted someone to answer this, and I actually had some people give me some really interesting answers, and the person we hired answered this completely wrong. But she was able to explain her thought process to me as she was answering the question, and I could see where she was making the connections with what she had just learned on the certification exam. And that to me showed more than getting the right answer, because
Michelle?
I could see her trying to apply what she had learned.
Michelle, sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh no, are you not able to see it?
No, we're not able to see the screen. We lost it sometime in between a few minutes ago. Yeah,
Oh no.
I think.
Okay, is that back?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we'll bounce back. Did we get to this slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Okay. Next, the scenarios that I outlined. So those will be in the presentation, which, by the way, we'll make available. Okay, so after scenario questions, it's soft skills. And so again, these are more of the things about your personality, your work style, your philosophy, your attitudes, those kinds of things. I actually hated this question when I got it back as feedback from my colleagues as to what to ask someone. Would you rather deliver something on time but not 100% complete, or something perfect but late? And I went, neither. I want to deliver it on time and done. Like, are you kidding me? And the argument came back that it's asking a question of, do you have an agile mindset? Are you of the understanding or opinion that delivering something that is at least your MVP, your minimum viable product, is acceptable, and you're going to continue to iterate and improve it over time? So deliver something on time, maybe that's not 100% complete, and whatever requirements don't make it into a second sprint or to a second project iteration later down the road. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. It needs to work. But the intent of this question really is to find out what your mindset is towards software development. This is where my accidental admin introduction does not help me, because I'm still trying to learn some of those development principles and agile and that sort of framework, because when I grew up, you got asked to do something and it was on time and it was done. So, but it's interesting, just be able to explain your reasoning with these. That's the big part of it, is there's not necessarily a right answer. And how you answer it is more important sometimes than what you answer. So being able to explain it. Sometimes these things are just, they're tough. Do you prefer to work alone or in a group? I don't want to answer that question. I really don't. Sometimes it depends. So my advice on this one is to be honest, but also play up the other side. So for me, I honestly prefer to work alone. Like, I love being able to sit down at my computer and focus for 3 or 4 hours, knock out a project, feel like I've accomplished something. However, before I can do that, it's important for me to collaborate with others to ensure that the project I knock out benefits from that collaboration and the input of other people. So basically what I'm doing is I'm still being honest that, you know, I like this part of the job and this appeals to me, and I have the capability to do both, because I've basically answered out of both sides of my mouth by saying I understand the importance and I'm, you know, committed to it, while still being able to express my preference for working alone. Not that I don't like people, but because I like the feeling of accomplishment that comes out of that. So I think it's about finding your truth, and you need to work on these answers before you get into an interview. If you really prefer working with a group, you know, I love the collaboration aspect. I love being able to work with other people and bounce ideas off of each other. However, when it's time to get down to getting the work done, you know, I certainly don't mind putting my head down and being able to work on something myself and deliver what I've committed to. You know, so there's different ways to answer that, whichever your preference is, that still show your commitment to being able to work with both. How would you handle an unreasonable request from a user? This is getting into conflict management. It's about things like being able to say no by saying yes. You know, instead of just being like, well, I would tell them they're stupid and there's no reason to do that. That's probably not going to go well on the tactful train. So an unreasonable request might be that you ask them for more information and you continue digging until they can come to the realization that what they're asking is unreasonable. Or you might deflect and say, you know, let me take that back and think about it for a while, as opposed to giving them an immediate no. Because if you're able to come back to them with, okay, I've considered your request, these are my concerns, because of these, can we look at other options? Is also a more tactful way to handle a request like that than being, no, you're stupid. I can't believe you'd ask me that. And then what about from your supervisor manager? Now we're starting to ask, what happens when someone in a position of authority over you does the same thing? It's tough, but sometimes you have to be able to push back on these people, because you are the expert, unless they are Salesforce certified and have been working in it a lot, and they know these things. And even then, it's okay to ask those clarifying questions and kind of go, okay, what are we trying to get out of this? And then finally, this last one, someone told me they ask, and I don't like it either because it feels out of left field, but I get the intent. I'm thinking about going on vacation to either the beach or the mountains. So take a breath, and then how would you convince me to pick one, and which one would you convince me? And what I'm basically trying to do is get to your think on your feet skills. So if you're in a meeting and someone asks you a question or you need to defend a position, can you do it? And then what are the things that you come back to me with? Like maybe the follow-up questions are, well, are you trying to relax or are you more interested in being active on your vacation? You know, do you want to be around crowds of people or do you prefer something that's a little bit more remote and quiet? And then you can say, well, depending, you know, I'd go to the beach because you can surf and you can snorkel and you can parasail and you can blah, 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 blah. Or, you know, go to the mountains because you can hike and you can ski and you can do all of these things. Or, you know, the opposite, on the beach, you don't have to do anything but lay in the sand and veg out. You know, go to an all-inclusive resort where you can lay in the sun and drink and eat and just relax and recharge. So it's about how fast can you think about that? How can you articulate it? And again, how are you going about persuading them based on what's important to them for this event, in this case, a vacation? Okay, so questions that you need to be asking. Some of the things that were always important to me, and I interviewed for a job last year that I ended up not accepting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is what are their expectations for the first insert number of days here? First 30 days, first 90 days, first 6 months, first whatever makes sense to you. It's important to know what you're getting yourself into and what they're expecting from you in that time frame. Unless you're really interested in just going and making a paycheck, it's worth asking about what the career and growth potential is, either within this position or within the company. Do people usually move around the company, move up in the company? Do they hire from within? Is this going to be another stop on your job hop train of career path where you get this job and if you really want some growth potential, the next thing you're going to do is find a different job and leave? What is their plan for the next 5 years? Where are they trying to go? And how do you and your position that you're applying for help with that goal? If they don't have a 5-year plan for the company, do you think they have a 5-year plan for you? Probably not. These were two that were hugely important for me. What kind of support do you offer for my personal development or continuing education? The only reason I'm in a position to apply for this job is because I have learned so much more than when I started that made me attractive and shiny to you. So you should be in a position to want me to continue learning to be more attractive and more shiny to you, because now that I'm here, that's just going to benefit you more so even than me. Do you encourage community involvement? For me, this is a huge thing. I love giving back to the ecosystem. When I applied for that job, I had 3 or 4 speaking engagements that were already on the books at different conferences. And I wanted to make sure if I changed jobs that they were not going to be a roadblock to that. What else is important to you? Do you want to know about their culture? Do you want to understand where they are on certain social issues? If they're socially, conscious and responsible, are they supportive of LGBTQIA+? I can't ever say that acronym without screwing it up. Do they commit to the environment? Are they sustainable? Those kinds of things. Whatever it is that's important to you, you spend almost more of your waking life at work than anywhere else in the world. And for me personally, no amount of money that's below 7 digits is probably worth me being miserable at work. If you pay me $1 million, I might consider it. Bonus, right now, how did they respond to COVID? What did they do for their employees? Did they furlough people and lay them off? Did they switch to a work from home? Were they flexible with people who had issues with childcare? All of those things speak immediately to how they take care of their employees and whether or not you're a cog in a machine that's replaceable like a plastic part, or if they actually understand that their most valuable asset is their employees and they work to take care of them. Okay, red flags to watch out for. If they're asking you questions in the interview that violate a protected characteristic, you're not allowed to discriminate when you hire. Things like, well, how old are you? Are you married? You know, anything religion related. I mean, disabilities are protected. They have to be able to make reasonable accommodations. Family planning. If you're visibly pregnant and they start asking you about it in terms of anything more than, you know, what are your plans for a start date or availability, those are red flags, because if they're not willing to basically obey employment law, what else is going on that's probably shady there? Wildly outrageous interview questions. And this is a judgment call. Sometimes it's people that are interviewing and they want to be a little bit more personable and relaxed, so they throw in some things that are fun, and they're trying to see how well you respond to that. If it's 1, okay. If it's like 5, that starts to be really weird and uncomfortable. Like, I'm not going to tell you what color crayon I should be because I don't freaking know, and I don't see how that's relevant. If you can't interview with or meet your direct supervisor, that's a red flag to me. And that's a lot of the reason I didn't take the job I was offered, because I'm committing to work for a company and for an individual that I don't know. What if our personalities don't mesh? Do I get to be involved in the hiring process for the person who's going to directly, you know, supervise me? If they're a micromanager, I'm going to be miserable. So being able to understand the environment that you're getting yourself into and be comfortable with it is important. If they give you non-committal answers, or they say no without using the word no to some of those things that are important to you, like continuing education or community involvement, trust your instincts. If you feel uncomfortable, if you're not sure, if you're hemming and hawing a lot over something they've said, your gut knows. Listen to it. And this is a lot of why I ended up not taking that job, is because when I started talking about my community involvement and attending conferences and things, it was well, you know, we'd certainly like to support you in that, you know, and we'll have to see what comes up because the job has to come first. And it was one of those things where I started extrapolating the way that was said, because yes, the job always comes first. I can't just drop it when I'm 2 days away from a project and say, see ya, I'm going to a conference, have a good time. But it started feeling like it was going to be parlayed into, well, gosh, you know, we really just don't feel like your work ethic is enough to support this, or, you know, we're going to let you go to the one that's local, but that's it. And, you know, then I'm like, are you going to like start telling me I can't take vacation time because your needs outweigh my ability to take my vacation time? When I started to get that feeling, I noped out. I did. Okay, so now it's audience participation time. Like I said, bribery is available if needed. But I want to know from you, if you have been in an interview and you got one of these questions and you just didn't know how to answer it, what was that question? Is there anything specifically that we can help you prepare for that you're worried about?
Michelle, this is Doug. Thank you very much for the presentation. My question, it goes back to the soft skills. Like if you're applying for remote positions and they ask, do you prefer to work alone or with a group? Is that like a trick question? Because technically you're working by yourself, right? Like how do you navigate through that question if it's a remote position?
Well, I mean, in a remote position, I think you call it out and you sort of, you poke a small amount of fun with that, going, well, seeing as how I'm working remote, I better love my own company, you know, because I'm going to be by myself a lot. But then you go with all of the technology that we have today, you know, it's still able to have video calls and conference calls and instant messaging, you know, chat capabilities or whatever else for me to be able to work with my colleagues. And it goes back to that, you know, collaboration is still important unless you're being, you know, hired to run a clinical trial on how being in solitary confinement drives you crazy. You're going to need to talk to somebody else in your company at some point. So it's, you know, if you are one who likes to work with that better, you know, maybe it's we make weekly stand-up meetings and check-ins, you know, team calls or whatever. So I think you can work remotely and you can still collaborate. I mean, 80% of some of my days are spent on meetings with the rest of my colleagues, even though we've been all working from home since March because of COVID. So I think it's less about your location and more about the tools and technology that you have to leverage for that. And you can still answer it the same way and then just, you know, throw a little humor in there of, well, I guess since I work out of my house, I better like my own company.
Thanks. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was an excellent session, Michelle. I would like to stress upon one of the point that you mentioned, the questions that you ask the interviewer. So those are very important because the interviewer also checks what kind of questions you're coming up with and what kind of information you want to know about them. So it's very important as part of your preparation for process, also make sure that you are prepared to ask questions. And my number one tip will be to be confident. So confident, have the confidence to answer the questions and be prepared for the interview and be prepared to ask the questions as well. Do some research before you take the interview call. Do some research about their Salesforce practice or the company and be prepared with the questions as well.
Absolutely. Any other tricky questions anybody wants to talk through?
Hi, yeah, this is Rena. So I've actually had some interviews which have been solely soft skill questions where I was all prepared for those technical questions and I had my answers there. And then it was all, tell us about a time that you did this or you encountered this. And so I had done some research and there was something called the STAR method where you have your situation, task, action, and results. So I would encourage others to look into that a little bit just to have your stories ready for when they ask those. So yeah, there was a lot of soft skill, like tell us about a time when your attention to detail was critical to a task, or tell us about a time that you took a risk and what was the outcome. So I would just encourage everyone to be prepared with those stories.
Yep. Tell me about a time you failed.
Exactly. The number of times I get asked this question is almost every interview. What are the challenges you faced and how did you handle the situation?
Absolutely. Okay, so I know we're just about on time here. So I always like to leave people with more resources. The top two in the blue color are Trailhead modules specifically about interviewing and Salesforce hiring processes. So as all of us know, we should get more Trailhead badges. And so I definitely encourage you to take the module on the trail. The rest are some other blogs, YouTube videos, other things that I found out on the internet that seemed very useful and relevant for you guys to do some more research. I absolutely encourage you, the tips for video interviews, especially right now. It goes into a lot of things like making sure your webcam is clean so your picture isn't blurry, and lighting so that you don't have a bright light behind you when your face is shadowed and they can't actually see you. And things like when you research a company, what you don't want to do is basically start spouting back at them a bunch of facts about the company to prove that you did your research ahead of time. If you have to do that, it kind of actually looks bad. Yes, we want to know you did your research. So being able to ask a question that slightly references that is going to be better than, so I see you won all of these awards and that you hired this person last year and you had a feature in, you know, the Wall Street Journal, and okay, great. You know what? I work here. I know all that. I don't need you to spout back to me that you were able to find all this publicly available information on my company. Now, if you're to say, I saw in the Wall Street Journal that you launched this product last year, you know, what went into that decision to get into that line of business, or where do you see that in 5 years? It's a way to tacitly acknowledge that you did your research and you have taken it and you've applied it to a question that you feel is relevant to this job interview. And a lot of what this does is being prepared with those questions makes the interview much more of a two-way street, especially if you've been job searching for a while. It can be very easy for you to essentially give up your power and feel like the interviewer on the other side of the table is God. It's their decision of your fate. Am I going to get the job? Am I not going to get the job? And it's very nervous because you're trying to make this great impression and make them like you, so they offer you a job, as if you have absolutely no agency in this whatsoever. Like I said, I turned down the job last year. Now, granted, I have a great job and I didn't go looking for this job. It fell in my lap. So I was in a position where I could be picky, and I was, because I got those red flags. But sometimes you need to remember that you're interviewing this company as much as they are interviewing you. And if it's not a good fit on either side, it's not a bad thing to walk away and wait for the right job. Now, if you're desperate, I mean, obviously you can stick out just about anything for a certain amount of time. And those are things that you need to weigh. I'm not telling you to, hold out for your dream job and be an unemployed person for, a decade. But just realize that it needs to be a right fit on both sides of the table, and don't give up your agency in making that decision that's right for you, because the person across the table is your interviewer and you give them all that power. Make sure you keep some of that for yourself, especially as a female. That's a little bit harder for us sometimes, because we've been, brought up to be polite and kind and a little bit more kind of timid, I guess we'll call it. So anyway, those are some of my tips. I mean, the interview is your first and best chance to make sure that what you're about to do with the next stage of your life works well for both of you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was a ton of resources.
Yep. So with that, thank you. I'm so glad to have been here to present today. If anybody would like to connect, I'm more than happy to. I'm way more active on Twitter than I am on LinkedIn. So if you send me a LinkedIn request, please let me know how we met. Otherwise, I'm like, I know there was way more people on here than I got to catch names for, but it was definitely lovely to meet you all.
It's a pleasure to have you, Michelle. And if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me or Michelle. We will be very happy to answer your questions.
Recording, and thank you for your unique knowledge, Michelle. I definitely want to connect with you. You got the job, and that I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn and Twitter, following you. So congrats. And there's an additional tip that I picked up for interviewing and communication in general. And this is everyone can listen to this podcast for this communication coach. And if you're currently out of work, you can get the free lessons from this communication coach. He's offering free lessons for anyone who's been out of work due to the pandemic or anything like that during this time. So we're going to pop that episode in here so everyone can be able to listen to the episode. And then if you're able to get the free lessons, you can get that. So what I can do right now is I can share with you one of the lessons, actually two of the lessons, because one of the lessons is to teach a lesson, because teaching helps teach yourself. And that's why, I've been having informational interviews with everyone across so that's my actual little tip. I've been having informational interviews with everyone across the Ohana. I've scheduled over 130 already, whether they're experts and amateurs, because the best way to prepare for an interview is to practice. And it's hard to get someone to practice with. They're like, I'm not a career coach, don't practice with me. So just say, hey, I'd like to have an informational interview with you. And when you do that, that is interview practice, because you have to tell about yourself, and you have to hone that message, and you have to know how to transform that message, translate that message to who your audience is, because you're going to be interviewing with different people, whether they're users, managers, or executives. So being able to know how to communicate yourself to different people will be a great skill from just having lots of informational interviews. I'll pop that in the chat as well. That's actually from another podcast called Career Collab Radio. So great to listen to, all about from career coaches, resume writers, all the sorts. And the host of that podcast is Justin Dux, who's also an admin. So Michelle, I don't know if you know him, but I'm going to connect you with him, because you'd be a great guest on his podcast radio show.
Justin who?
Dux, D-U-X. He's in Minnesota.
I do not know him. Looking forward to meeting him. Perfect.
All right. So as far as a quick tip, then a little preview of the Communicate Like a Pro is for answering any question. If you need time to think, you can pause. Don't be afraid, because the pause in your mind is always going to be greater than the actual pause. But other secret tips to pause, or there's 5 communication techniques you can give back. So you can clarify, comment, compliment, defer, and refer. So you can clarify. If someone says, "Tell me about a time when you had to work by yourself." Okay, so had to work by myself in a Salesforce project or with a school project. What are you hoping to extrapolate from that question? comment? That is a good question because we're certainly, or that's a compliment. That's certainly a good question because we are having to work alone right now on projects. Comment. That's interesting because I was just realizing how people have to shift to adjust to working by themselves. So this is how I've been able to do that. Defer. I'd like to actually go into that question a bit later into the interview to find out more about the work I have to do in this job, to be able to bring in that type of work and explain how I've done that type of work by myself. Refer. Well, you know, I think actually my references will be a good source for that because I can tell you how I work by myself. I like to provide my references also to let you know the type of work I produce, and you can be able to get that verified. So those are the 5 tips you'll hear more about in his course.
Thank you very much for sharing, Jason. I'm going to link those resources to the recording as well. And
Great.
any other questions? Great. We're so glad to have you all today, and I'm sure it is a very helpful and informational session. Thank you very much, Michelle, once again. And want to let you know about the upcoming sessions. The next Saturday, we have another session with Janet Elliott on how we can be a great presenter and how we can have our presentations picked for the Salesforce events, Dreamforce, and other Salesforce events. And we do have few other sessions coming up. Don't miss and keep on the lookout for the notifications from the group. And we hope to see you again next week. Thank you for joining us.
Yep.